the small, seemingly tranquil town of Sable Creek, an old, time-worn house stood at the edge of a dense forest, its history shrouded in mystery and whispers of the supernatural. The locals would often speak in hushed tones about the strange occurrences that transpired within its walls, particularly the eerie sound of footsteps in the attic when the moon was high and the night was still. The Johnson family, unaware of the house's sinister reputation, moved in, attracted by its secluded location and antiquated charm. They were a family of four: Michael, the father, a writer in search of tranquility; Sarah, the mother, an artist with a love for the vintage; Emily, their teenage daughter, bright and curious; and little Sam, a spirited 8-year-old. The first few weeks were blissful, with the family settling into their new life and enjoying the quiet that the house offered. However, it wasn't long before they began to notice peculiarities. Objects would be found out of place, doors would creak open on their own, and the soft yet distinct sound of footsteps could be heard coming from the attic in the dead of night. Curiosity piqued, and slightly unnerved, Michael decided to investigate. He ventured into the attic, armed with nothing but a flashlight and a dose of skepticism. The attic was cluttered with relics of the past: dusty furniture, faded photographs, and boxes filled with forgotten memories. As he sifted through the items, Michael felt a sudden chill run down his spine, and the soft sound of footsteps echoed around him. He shone his flashlight around the attic, but there was no one to be seen. Shaken, he hurriedly left, convincing himself that it was just his imagination playing tricks on him. However, the footsteps persisted, growing louder and more frequent as the days passed. Emily and Sam, both sensitive to the strange happenings, became increasingly uneasy. Whispered stories of a haunted attic circulated through the family, heightening the sense of fear that lingered in the air. Sarah, ever the skeptic, dismissed the tales as products of overactive imaginations. She urged her family to do the same and focus on the beauty of the house and its surroundings. But the footsteps could not be ignored. They were a constant reminder that something, or someone, was lingering in the shadows. Desperate for answers, Michael delved into the history of the house, uncovering tales of previous inhabitants who had experienced the same haunting phenomena. The house, it seemed, had a reputation, and the Johnsons were its latest victims. Determined to rid his family of the spectral presence, Michael sought the help of a local paranormal investigator, a man known for his expertise in such matters. The investigator, intrigued by the Johnsons' story, agreed to spend the night in the house, hoping to witness the footsteps firsthand and uncover the truth behind the haunting. As night fell, the Johnsons and the investigator gathered in the living room, waiting for the footsteps to begin. The house was eerily silent, the tension palpable. And then, just as the clock struck midnight, the footsteps started, soft at first, then growing louder and more deliberate. The investigator, his equipment at the ready, motioned for Michael to follow him into the attic. The sound of footsteps was overwhelming now, echoing through the cramped space. The investigator began to speak, his voice steady as he addressed the unseen presence. "Who are you? What do you want?" he asked, his words cutting through the darkness. The footsteps paused, and for a moment, the attic was silent. And then, a low whisper filled the air, its words indistinct, but filled with sorrow and longing. The investigator, his demeanor changing from confident to cautious, pressed on, seeking answers from the entity. The temperature in the attic dropped, and the sense of sadness intensified. The footsteps resumed, this time accompanied by the faint sound of a woman's sobs. As the night wore on, the entity's story began to unravel. She was a former inhabitant of the house, a young woman who had lived and died in agony in the early 1900s. Her life had been one of sorrow and unfulfilled desires, and her spirit had lingered in the attic, trapped by her own despair. The investigator, his heart heavy with the weight of her story, knew he had to help. He spoke words of comfort and reassurance, urging her to let go of her pain and move on from the world of the living. But the entity, her spirit entwined with the house, was not ready to leave. She had found solace in the presence of the Johnsons, a family full of life and love, something she had never experienced in her own lifetime. The investigator, realizing that he could not force her to leave, made a decision. He turned to Michael, explaining that the entity was not malevolent, but simply lost and alone. She did not wish to harm the Johnsons, but her presence was a constant reminder of her own tragic past. The Johnsons, touched by her story, chose to coexist with the entity, accepting her as a part of their home. The footsteps in the attic continued, but they were no longer a source of fear. They were a reminder that the house had a history, and that the Johnsons were now a part of it. As the years passed, the footsteps became a part of the Johnsons' lives, a peculiar quirk of their beloved home. And the entity, her story heard and her presence accepted, found a sense of peace she had never known in life. The house on the edge of the forest stood the test of time, its walls echoing with the sounds of the past and the present. And while the footsteps in the attic never ceased, they were no longer footsteps of sorrow, but footsteps of a spirit finally at rest. And so, the story of the house and its unseen inhabitant became a local legend, a chilling yet poignant tale of the coexistence between the living and the dead. The Johnsons lived out their days in the house, their lives intertwined with the entity in the attic, and the footsteps continued.